Welcome back guys to another behind the scenes video. Thank you all so much for your response to my latest remake. You guys really seemed to enjoy the last one of these I did for my Bulldog remake, so I thought why not treat you lot to another one, and what a remake to be able to do it for as well. Busy going backwards, despite the massive amount of fun I had making it and the pride I feel for the final result, was easily the most difficult video I've made for this channel, and as such, there will be a lot to cover in this video. While Bulldog probably had the hardest individual scene to get right, Falcon's crash if that wasn't obvious enough, Busy going backwards had like 6 or 7 sequences that were very difficult to pull off and really put my filmmaking skills to the test. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the full behind the scenes making of my Busy going backwards remake. Like all my remakes, I began with an extensive planning process. By the time I reached Bulldog's production, I realised my last 3 remakes had all followed a linear progression throughout the classic seasons. The first, Dirty Objects from Season 1, the second, Break Fran from Season 2, and the third, Gordon and the Famous Visitor from Season 3. So for this one, I knew it was time to tackle the big beast, an episode from Season 5. I narrowed my choices down to a few episodes. A Better View for Gordon and Duncan Gets Spooked were the initial frontrunners, and don't worry, I have plans for both of these episodes in the future. But there was another one that stuck out just a bit more for me, one that had also been a massive childhood favourite of mine. Busy going backwards. I must have smoked something funny. I knew that doing this remake would be a massive undertaking, especially considering I was just getting back into my uni courses when I started, but honestly, who cares? That time was going to pass either way, so I figured I might as well try something meaningful that would actually push me to my creative limits, so Busy going backwards it was. First off, I watched the episode several times and took notes of what specific props, and in this case, equipment, I would need to make in order to accurately recreate the episode at the highest level possible. These were new faces for Toad. Twitter user BlackWeasel1957 made these awesome custom facial expressions for Toad many years ago, and considering the amount of screen time the little break van gets in this episode, as well as the ease of changing them over compared to the usual Tommy plastic faces, it was an easy decision to utilise these ones. These were sized accordingly in Google Drawings, then printed in colour and glued on cards, so they had a little bit of rigidity to them. An open 4-track carriage shed. While the Tommy open harbour shed is an awesome item, it's just too small. Fitting 3 tracks is nearly impossible, and I knew it would have looked pretty lame on the big Knapford's yard set, so work went into making a much bigger and more detailed model. The main roof was made from cardboard with one of my favourite model making techniques used for the corrugated slats. I tore the top layer off a whole bunch of cardboard, exposing this ridge pattern. Once cut up into small squares and glued to the roof, it made a super convincing pattern. Then I made the support beams out of coffee stirrers, which was easily the most difficult part of making the model, as I had to make sure all of them would cut and glue to the right size and angle. Then came painting and withing, and voila, out came one of my favourite props I've ever designed. Even though this was made for the specific purpose of being in the remake, I cannot wait to feature it in some of my other sets. It really is eye-catching. Crossing Gate. A pretty spectacular sequence in this episode features Toad careening through a level crossing at the bottom of Gordon's Hill. I still had these old crossing gates I made back in 2018, but they barely stretch over 2 tracks and didn't look all that great now, so I set to work making new ones. This included making a pier that was purposely broken and mangled for Toad to crash into. These were made pretty simply with coffee stirrers cut in half as the main beams, then matchsticks and cards were used for extra details. The old stone bridge. Out of all the memorable sequences in Busy going backwards, the one where Toad crashes into a muddy pond next to an old bridge is by far the most iconic. The bridge's main structure was made predictably out of cardboard. I then used cut up pieces of an egg carton as the rock wall on the bridge. This created a really nice, rugged and rock-like appearance that, while not as convincing as other techniques, worked brilliantly in this context. The egg carton material gave me a lot of flexibility, being able to glue it over edges and bend it to my will, which wouldn't have been possible with something like plaster of Paris. Then came the standard painting and weathering, and another model was completed. Not my absolute favourite or anything, but I really like this model, and I think most importantly, the techniques I discovered while making this one can be applied to numerous future props and projects. And finally, a new tracking camera system. I normally just use my mini dolly for any moving tracking shots in my videos, but Season 5 notoriously uses these front-on tracking shots of engines, which would be impossible to achieve with the dolly, so I had to go with a new way for shooting these ones. At first I tried using a knockoff GoPro for some tests, but that actually ended up nearly deleting all the footage that was on my SD card at the time, notably basically all my Bulldog footage. Once that fiasco was avoided, I said fuck you to the fake GoPro and decided it would be easier and more consistent to just use my main camera, the Sony HDR CX405. I know a lot of people in the community use this one, and I'd highly recommend it if you're getting into filming with models. It's easy to use and reasonably practical, with the potential to capture some really beautiful images. Anyway, I made a tracking rig using a Tommy flatbed, a short piece of fishing wire, some electrical tape, and some 1x4 Lego pieces. I jammed the 1x4 with 2 plates on top in between the 2 small barriers on the flatbed. I then placed my camera so the rear end was sitting on the top of the Lego and the front was sitting on the lower barrier. Using the tape, I secured my camera really tightly to the flatbed and connected the short piece of fishing wire from my flatbed to the subject, in this case, Toad. When I connected an engine to the flatbed and turned it on, it pulled the flatbed holding the camera forward, while the fishing wire, still connected to the flatbed and towed, pulled him forward at the same speed as the camera, while keeping a relative distance. Within the context of the episode, I think this effect worked really well. The jerky, handheld feel of these shots really add intensity and weight to what we are seeing on screen. I didn't want these to be overly smooth and feel too perfect. I wanted them to feel a little harried and bumpy, like someone was just barely in front of Toad, filming them while they were just keeping themselves alive. The same process was repeated for the POV shots, just instead of fishing wire, I had the engine either pushing the flatbed forward, or for some shots, pulling it backwards with the footage being reversed later in post. So, once all my major pre-production was finished, I jumped straight into filming. You guys should be able to follow my filming order pretty well, considering all the train spotting and behind the scenes video I made on the individual sets of this remake. Gordon's Hill Bridge was first, essentially the bottom of the hill. I actually filmed a different version of the set earlier with much taller hills, but once I transferred the footage to my computer, I realised I completely fucked up the lighting, and I had to go back and film this entire set again from scratch. This ended up being a blessing and a curse. Despite the wasted time from remaking the set and filming everything all over again, the second time around was a much more accurate looking set, with shallower hills, a smoother gradient, obviously much improved lighting. Next was Knapford Yards. I won't go too in depth for this one, as I already did a whole behind the scenes video for this set alone, but this was a fun one to make. I went really hard on the little details for this one, and I think it shows. The whole set is full of micro details that really elevate the sense of organised chaos I had going on, helping to make it feel like an actual busy train yard. I also had a lot of fun picking the rolling stock scene in the yard. I didn't just want a bunch of grey and black trucks, so I tried to throw in some gold ones, red, green and orange ones as well, to create a bit of diversity within the sidings. Following that came Wellsworth Crossing. This was another fun one to make, though some of the filming was a bit difficult, specifically Toad's POV shot as he hits the gate. I didn't have any help for this day of filming, so it was very difficult turning on the engine to push the camera forward while also pulling Birdie along on a string before the camera hit the gate, all while making sure the camera stayed relatively smooth and the shot actually looked good. I got it in the end after many takes, and it was relatively smooth sailing from there. Pretty obvious advice here, but always try to film your most difficult shots first in a remake, or any video for that matter. Your motivation and energy will be at its peak at the beginning of the shoot, so you're better off expending all of that on the hardest shots, so by the time you finish you can relax and ease off with your simpler ones. Then came Crosby. Again, I already went fairly in depth on this in an earlier video, so I'll keep this brief. I loved making this set for this one, despite how long it took. Merging the yard wall into that giant hill behind the station really helped the two environments come together smoothly, and as a result, the set really felt massive and grand. Definitely one of my favourites from this remake. I again filmed the harder shots first, namely Toad's POV as he swerves through the yard and back onto the main line. Many takes went into getting this exactly right. An underestimated difficulty was making sure the sky backdrop was visible throughout the whole shot, so a lot of time went into perfecting my camera position and moving the backdrop around. Eventually I got it finished, and I was very happy to call it a day on the set. Funnily enough, it always ends up being that my favourite sets in a remake are normally the hardest to film with one Gordon-sized exception coming up soon. Next, I filmed the signal box and station master's office interiors. These building facades were made from scratch, based on the actual interiors used in the TV show. These were pretty fun to build and decorate with matchstick detailing and small pieces of Lego scattered all around. These two sets came out super well, and I think they fit really seamlessly into the remake. Definitely the peak of my large-scale creations after Gordon and Duke. Next was all the random mainline sets that are in this episode, like the one where Toad nearly kills Gordon. These were super straightforward, just 3 tracks and a countryside for all of them. The main challenge was getting all the POV and tracking shots, and there were a lot of them. A lot of these were actually filmed backwards and were just reversed in post, most notably the POV shot of Toad narrowly avoiding James, as it was easier to time the shot with the engines going in reverse. Despite the usual difficulties that come with filming moving shots, these sets were by far the easiest to do out of the whole remake, and I actually had quite a bit of fun filming the tracking and POV shots. This was the point where I started to see the main body of the remake really come alive, and how it would all edit together. Literally going against my own rule, I said less than 5 minutes ago, but I actually did leave all the hard sets till the end for this remake. Yippee! Wellsworth Station was way more complicated than it needed to be, but you know me, I love unnecessarily making things more difficult for myself. The second shot of this episode is this awesome long take where the engines pass under the footbridge, then the camera lowers down to ground level as Thomas passes underneath. Not the simplest shot in the world, but seems reasonable enough. Well, the only piece of equipment I had on hand to pull this off was this old tripod of my dad's, which is a rod which lowers down within the tripod, which I knew would be perfect for this remake. Unfortunately, the lowest the rod can sit is about 25cm off the ground, so I decided instead of making a new complicated piece of equipment to pull the shot off, I'll just build the set 30cm off the ground. Seems simple enough. Except for the fact that the way I did this was 3 wooden boards placed precariously on top of paint cans and DVDs. Every time I touched something on the set, I was terrified that the whole thing would fall in on itself. I even think I lost some sleep worrying about leaving it overnight in the garage and that some rogue gust of wind would come through and destroy all my hard work. Obviously that didn't happen, but that didn't make filming any easier. This opening shot was very, very hard to get. I had my mate Jonas turn on Henry, then run around next to me where I was in a very tight corner holding the tripod. When Henry reached the platform, I turned on Percy, then slowly, and not very smoothly, lowered the camera down as Jonas pulled Thomas past with fishing wire. While this sounds simple enough, it was actually very difficult to get right. The engines would be out of time, Percy would hit the platform, the tripod wouldn't go down properly. After seemingly endless takes, I got a few I was fairly happy with and called it a day. The rest of the shots were thankfully much easier to get, though I did make up a mini Wellsworth set afterwards to get this reverse shot of Oliver passing through the station. If you somehow didn't notice that, well, I'm sure you're mind blown. I mentioned a Gordon-sized exception earlier, didn't I? Oh yes, Gordon's Hill. Yeah, I can't lie, I'm not a huge fan of this set. I have never really been a fan of building Gordon's Hill for any of my remakes. It's another precarious type of set, being stood on more paint cans and DVDs, but it doesn't have any of the same charm or detail as Wellsworth. I mean, it's just a hill. Anyway though, yeah, this set wasn't that fun to make, and it was even less fun to film on. I made the hill too steep for Oliver to travel up with his trucks, so a lot of the shots in the sequence are either reversed or I just use fishing wire, which I don't really like using unless absolutely necessary. Also, I kind of fucked the lighting up in a few shots, I didn't cover the end of the set properly, the train passes the same area like 7 times, and overall I just don't really like the look of the set. I don't think I detailed it properly and it just looks a little boring to me. Maybe I'm being a perfectionist though, and I'd definitely be interested to hear if you guys agree with me or not. Regardless, this was definitely my least favourite set to build and film on, but I do think with the editing a lot of the faults were mitigated, and I did spend a lot of time colour grading the shots in the sequence so they are more consistent, so I don't think the lighting is as noticeable. Anyway, moving on. Then came the grand set piece for the whole episode, the Old Stone Bridge. Pretty lame name, but that's what it is on the wiki. Anyway, I was super happy with how this set came out, and it's definitely one of my favourites. I love how I was able to integrate the pond with the surrounding area, as well as all the little details my girlfriend, Bianca, and I added, like all the crates and bits of wood scattered around the tracks. The pond was a bowl filled with water that was placed below the boards holding up the set. Filming this set was predictably tricky. I knew I only had one shot to get the crash right, so I spent a good while figuring out how I wanted Toad to fall in. First, I wanted the engine to push him in off camera, but this was just too tricky, as I couldn't film the shot accurately without the engine being seen. Filming this in reverse was just out of the question, so I just compromised and pulled Toad forward with fishing wire. Not my favourite effect, but luckily it's not super noticeable, and I got the crash reasonably well in the first take, so I decided to just leave it at that. For the shots with Toad blowing bubbles, I had Bianca slowly pull Toad up, and then with a small piece of tubing, I blew bubbles low and off camera for a very convincing effect. I am super happy with how this whole set piece came out. I knew that this would be the defining feature of the remake, and I just think it tops off the whole video wonderfully. The final set was one of the most simple, and another one of my favourites, Wellsworth Sheds. Being the final set, I took this one really slow and just enjoyed dressing it up really nice. I had a lot of fun taking Toad into the garden and smushing him into the dirt and mud, and I think he really looked excellent. So much so, I actually have him on my shelf next to my Lego as a display piece. As this was a night scene, I also had a lot of fun playing with the lighting on this one. I bought these two HO scale street lamps off Temu that ended up looking great once plugged in, and having these set up added a really dynamic edge that was just missing in my previous night shots I've filmed. Something I want to invest in for future videos is some more varied lighting. It's definitely the next step I can take to elevate my videos to a whole new level. Once all the lights were set up, I filmed the shots and boom! The remake, after months of hard work, was finally finished shooting. Compared to my previous remakes, editing this one was actually a rather long process. Once I'd picked all my shots, I went about putting them into the edit timeline and cutting them side by side with the original episode to get all my cuts exactly right down to the frame. Then came my final colour grade, title guides, and voila! I had finally finished this absolute bitch of a remake. I won't lie, some of the filming for this episode was very arduous, and there were at least 3 times where I just wanted to scrap the whole remake entirely. But I persevered and I tried extremely hard to get this done while I was still motivated to, and the end result speaks for itself, I think. Despite all the filming issues and some of the shots not being up to my usual standard, as a whole I think this remake works so well. I really think the time I put into editing was the driving force behind this. Obviously after filming that big chunk of tracking shots, I was starting to see the finish line in sight, but once I actually began to edit the remake, I just realised how well everything flowed together, how intense the runaway actually was, how funny some of the cuts and dialogue were. I think, more than anything, I realised just how fucking good the original episode is. I always loved this one as a kid, but now as an adult, oh my god, the editing in this episode is just so seamless and well done, the humour always hits, and the runaway feels both frightening and thrilling. I think that the greatest gift with a remake is just gaining more of an appreciation for the original, both for me personally as a filmmaker and for you guys as an audience. Of course, it'll probably be a while before I attempt anything with this many moving camera shots, but I'm just so glad I stuck this one out and saw it to the end. Without a doubt, it's my favourite video I've ever made on this channel. My favourite sequences and sets in this one are the whole Wellsworth set, Toe's narrow miss with James, the building interiors, the crash scene, obviously, and the final scene at the sheds. Even little moments like the way I managed to edit together this shot of Toe closing his eyes just made me so happy. Stuff like that makes all the tough parts of filmmaking worth it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this very in-depth look into how I made my Busy Going Backwards remake.
It was fun, but from now on I'll be happy to look forward to the future. Busy going backwards, so to speak.
If you managed to stick around for this long, you deserve a treat. Now enjoy some bloopers! Oh no! Oh. Again, bro?